All right, good evening everyone, and welcome to our Take Charge session for March of 2014. So our speaker today is a friend of mine, Marc Mitchell. Marc is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. He's also a case manager where he works with me. That's where I met him, over at Toronto Rehab. And Marc's PhD is in kind of an interesting field. He's looking into something that's called health incentives. And I mentioned this last month. It's kind of an interesting idea, and it revolves around paying people to exercise. Now, I know many people here, because you guys are all biased and exercise regularly, are thinking, well, I'm doing it because I know it's healthy for me, it's good for me, it makes me feel good. That's motivation enough. But maybe for some people that aren't exercising as regular as they could, if we were to maybe offer them some financial compensation to exercise, maybe that would be a good thing. Maybe it would defray health costs a little bit. There's some benefits, there's some downsides, and we're very fortunate today to have Marc come and join us, so I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Marc Mitchell. Thanks, Marc.
Hi, Rob. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I just want to say, I think, Rob, you're doing such a wonderful job with this program. You're such a passionate leader, and we're all lucky to have him in our lives. So let's give him 10 years, right? Wonderful. Okay, so like Rob said, my name is Marc. The most important thing that you need to know about me tonight is that I'm a really proud father of two. A 2-year-old and a 5-week-old. So please take it easy on me during question period. I just came from a rather stressful dinner. Didn't sleep a ton last night. So take it easy if you please. Okay, so like Rob said, I'm a cardiac rehab supervisor, part-time at Toronto Rehab, which I absolutely love doing. I'm doing my PhD in the rest of the time I have over the course of the week at the University of Toronto. I'm about a year away from completing that, so hopefully that goes well. And then I also founded a financial health incentive design consulting company called Incentive Avenue, and have a total of 1 paying customer so far. So we're doing very well in the 12 months that we've been in existence. But I'm here to talk to you about financial health incentives. But before I do, I want to touch on my favorite topic. Well, favorite next to football and Natalie Portman, cardiac rehab, my favorite topic. So as you know, the benefits of cardiac rehab are unquestionable. Cardiac rehab, or participation in cardiac rehab, will reduce all kinds of cardiovascular disease risk factors. Blood pressure, helps you control your sugars, reduces stress, improves your cholesterol profile, etc., etc. Literally dozens of benefits. Also, as you can see in the figure here, people who participate in cardiac rehab are less likely to visit the emergency room after they finish. So the bottom 2 lines there are participators, and the top line there is people who don't participate in cardiac rehab. And even more impressive probably is that people who participate in cardiac rehab are 50% less likely to die in 5 years. So the mortality benefit is huge. And did you know that for people who graduate and maintain their fitness, their risk of dying is 25% lower. So the benefits are really massive. But you know what? The most important one probably, and you might agree, is the increased quality of life you get with participation and with continued regular exercise. Would you agree? Some nods. Okay, good. So a lot of these benefits, of course, are reserved for those who sign up for, complete, and sustain their exercise program. And so as wonderful as cardiac rehab is, there are some opportunities for improvement. For example, of the 2,000 or so people who are referred to our program, 500 drop out every year, about 30%. Of the 1,600 grads we have every year, 25% of those people aren't doing regular exercise 2 to 6 years after they graduate. And that's a low estimate. It could be even higher than that. It could be closer to 5, 6, 7, 800 people. So 800 people that we see annually aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, aren't getting the benefits of regular exercise after they graduate. So these are important issues from a human perspective, but from an economic perspective as well, because people who don't engage in these healthy behaviors cost the system more. Even in this room, I would guess that some of you struggle with some of the things that we've asked you to do over the course of the program and since then. For example, does anybody have trouble sneaking in 5 walking days a week? Or are you all perfect? Anybody struggling? I've got an alligator arm over here. Okay, a couple people struggle. How about resistance training? How are you all with your resistance training? Who's doing 2 or 3 times a week of their weightlifting, resistance training? Loud and proud, be proud. Okay, so let's say 25%. So not everybody. So there's room for improvement. What about chocolate bars, ice cream, chips? How are you with all of those things? You're great in that you consume plenty of them. Okay, so there are some issues, and we all struggle with some things, and you're sort of a self-selected group. You're doing better than most. Now, to address these stubborn issues, it's about more than just increasing motivation, I think. It's about creating scenarios that support and promote active, healthy living. It's about making the healthy choice the easier choice, the interesting choice, and maybe even the fun choice, believe it or not. And so for all these reasons, I think financial health incentives might actually be able to foster that kind of an environment, if you can believe it or not. And so the bold statement up here, we should pay people to exercise. Now don't start throwing the rotten tomatoes just yet. Bear with me for a few more slides, and I'll try to explain myself a little bit. Now, as you know, we've got 6 or 7 wonderful graduate programs, and I don't mean to propose incentives as a magic bullet, and I don't mean them as this massive or coercive bribe where we should be getting people to do things they don't want to do. What I intend for this whole idea of incentives to be is a complementary approach. So we've got all these wonderful programs. We've got our drop-in, which some of you might participate in. We've got Take Charge. You can't see this writing. I apologize, so I'll just read it out. We've got social events, peer support groups, annual fitness tests, and HeartWise certified gyms all across the city. So we've got wonderful graduate programs, but still these persisting problems of low compliance. So I think incentives might actually play an important role in driving and initiating and driving regular exercise in this case. So what do I mean financial health incentives? Do I actually mean giving people money to do things? And yeah, I kind of do, although that's not the only way to do it. So you might notice this picture on the top. That's Daryl, one of our supervisors. So if you show up to the gym 4 or 5 days in a week, or if you can show us that you've done your walk 4 or 5 days in a week like we expect, we'll give you $10. Or if you start to do the things that we think might lead to a more active lifestyle, we call these stepping stone behaviors, like wearing a pedometer or the low-tech version of just writing down, tracking what you're doing. And then we'll give you some cash to your grocery store. Or we could even give you some bus tokens if you're a TTC goer, because we know people who take public transit walk more. So as you can see, there are various ways of offering monetary incentives contingent on healthy behaviors. And the focus here is exercise. Now, before we do go down this wacky incentive road, it's probably a good idea to take a peek at the rest of the world and see if anybody else is doing it. And it turns out that a lot of people are doing it, including President Barack Obama. In 2010, they passed the Affordable Care Act, and there was an amendment in that act that now allows employers in the United States to pay their employees up to $1,500 in a health insurance premium reimbursement for achieving certain health outcomes. So if you get your blood pressure down to target, if you get your waist circumference down to target, we'll reimburse you up to $1,500. In the UK, they're also doing this kind of thing, although not on as big of a scale. Prime Minister David Cameron has this behavioral insights team, they call it, or the short form for that is called, they call themselves the Nudge Unit. And a part of their mandate is to start to implement these kinds of incentive-based public health policies to promote healthy behaviors, improve outcomes, and save the system money in the end. For example, they're giving people, overweight adults in low-income British neighborhoods, grocery store vouchers, like the one I just sort of talked about. Germany's been doing it the longest, since 2004. And there's some studies are actually trickling out now that suggest that people who participate in these incentive programs actually save the system $150 in direct healthcare costs, which on a population scale can actually add up quite quickly. So it looks like these big governments are actually starting to implement this sort of thing. And there's a ton of one-offs. There's smartphone apps that do this sort of thing. You've seen The Biggest Loser and all these weight loss challenges. A lot of gyms will pay people if they lose weight or if they win a weight loss contest. And in the Moscow subway station, since the Olympics or leading up to the Olympics, you could do 30 squats in front of a fancy bus token or subway token machine. And if you did those 30 squats with a fancy camera, it would give you a free subway pass and you would be on your way. So there are literally hundreds of examples like this around the world. So it's interesting. And you know what? Canada's doing it too, believe it or not. There are 8 either children's or adult fitness tax credits. Has anybody heard of these fitness tax credits? Okay, so there's a federal fitness tax credit set to be implemented next year if the budget is balanced. And basically, the government, if you reimburse your receipts to the gym and some other eligible expenses, the government will pay you back about $150. So there's some reasons why I don't think that'll work, actually. But nonetheless, this is where people are going. And not just governments, mind you. Lots of big companies in the States, Johnson & Johnson, General Electric. And we've been doing some research with a company based in Mississauga who specializes in this sort of thing. So there's a lot out there. And interestingly, the Public Health Agency of Canada recently funded a $1 million pilot project where YMCA members get air miles for attending the gym, for going to the gym. So if you swipe in at the YMCA, you can earn 1, 2, 5 air miles depending on how many times you go. Kind of interesting, isn't it? So anyway, why all this excitement? Why all this excitement? And specifically, why do I think this might work in a cardiac rehab context? So it's much more than a simple business transaction. You do this and I'll give you this much money. People who participate in financial health incentive programs are essentially making a behavioral contract, agreeing to a contract and making a commitment. They're also setting goals, even if it's just very simple, like 3 days a week of walking. They're also tracking behavior. So either you're just using the old-fashioned paper pencil or using an online monitoring tool, which we've used in the study we just completed. And they're also getting feedback. Have you seen these speed radar things on the road there? It lets you know how fast or slow you're going. How important is feedback in this scenario, but even more important when you're engaging in these complex lifestyle behaviors where the benefits you don't see for months or even years. The immediate feedback that this sort of a setup provides is actually quite valuable, separate from the monetary aspect of it all. And incentives can actually do double duty in a sense. We were just talking about how expensive parking is at hospitals and medical buildings in the city. What if we started offering people parking, Sunnybrook Hospital parking vouchers, for example, for doing certain things. The things that we know are healthy, and the things that we know save the system money. We could also reimburse people for gym memberships or running shoes or grocery vouchers. So in a lot of ways, we can offer health-related vouchers that offset existing health-related costs. Now, you've heard of co-payments, right? Like if you've got an insurance program, you buy your medications. You may or may not have to pay for some of the medication. Well, recent studies out of some really great academic journals show that when you introduce co-payments, when people have to start paying for some of this stuff themselves, they don't do it. They stop buying the medications that we know save lives, save the system money, and they stop doing the healthy things we know save the system money. So in one sense, helping offset these costs that we know are potential barriers for some people can be a real bonus for this kind of a program. And then last but not least, they're potentially really fun. F-U-N, fun. You can't underestimate the sizzle, of this kind of a program. It's like, oh, you're gonna do what? You're gonna actually pay? Oh, that's interesting. I'll tell my friend about it. Maybe I'm more likely to do the things I'm supposed to do because it's actually, I'm engaging in something that I actually enjoy. And it's kind of neat and fun and different. So I don't want to underestimate the fun factor either. There's actually a strong theoretical foundation for this kind of a thing too. Has anybody seen or read this book called Nudge? Has anybody heard about this? It came out in 2008. A couple of behavioral economists wrote it. One of them's working for Obama now. One of them's working for Prime Minister Cameron now. So they did quite well, actually. And so this actually provides a really strong foundation for financial health incentive intervention. So what is behavioral economics? It is a branch of economics that acknowledges psychological tendencies that underlie decision making. So in other words, human judgments, human decisions are biased in predictable, systematic ways. And these biases make it actually quite hard for us to make the healthy choices that we want to make. So a lot of rhetoric, a lot of words. Let's do a little example. As a junior academic, I like doing mini experiments all the time. So let's just do a little mini experiment. Show of hands here. If I could give you $200 today or $300 tomorrow, which would you choose? $200? Hands up. Okay, a couple of hands. $300? Okay, so let's say 70% of you would take $300 tomorrow. Okay, now how about this scenario? $200 today or $300 in 6 months? $200 today? Okay, many more. If it's 60%, $300 in 6 months? Okay, a handful of you. So the idea with this mini experiment is to illustrate the present bias. That's what they call it, present bias. So let's talk about it in terms of exercise. And I hope you can relate. I'm sure you will. Okay, so exercise. It can be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, can it? Maybe a low back issue, maybe the huffing and puffing, the sweating. It's just, a lot of times it's just not that pleasant. The time it takes out of a busy schedule to exercise is also a deterrent for a lot of people. And for, I'd say, 95% of the population, exercise isn't fun. So all of these sorts of costs, all of these sorts of barriers are born in the immediate, in the present time. And as a result, a lot of people make that notorious resolution to exercise more tomorrow. Yeah, I don't really feel like doing it today. I'd rather go for lunch or play with my grandkids or have a coffee. I'll do it tomorrow. And so that's what ends up happening. And then tomorrow turns into next week, which turns into next month. And then you kind of fall off the wagon. Even if you really, really value health, appearance, longevity, these really big rewards. But because those big rewards are way off in the future and sort of hard to conceptualize, they're not very tangible, those immediate costs become very prominent, making it hard to make a decision a healthy decision on a day-to-day basis. And that health, longevity, and what was the other one? Appearance, just sort of get put on the back burner, eventually burn, and turn into ashes. So that's the present bias. And the financial health incentives actually might play a role in shifting that scale so that the immediate benefit of exercise of the financial incentives helps to offset those immediate costs. So that's part of the theory. So we've got a problem in cardiac rehab, a problem of poor compliance. We've got people doing this sort of thing all over the world. There's good rationale for it, for sure. But do they actually work? So the 25-cent deposit I have to make in my grocery buggy every time I go to the No Frills is any indication, then definitely yes. Every time I go to the No Frills, I have to plug in 25 cents to get my buggy, and then I've got to take it in order to get my 25 cents back. I have to return my buggy. Is anybody in this situation? Yeah? Have you experienced this? In my experience, it has worked 100% of the time. So this is what we call, in the incentive world, a deposit contract. So I put some money down, and I really don't want to lose that money, even a quarter. And so I make sure I do what I need to do to get it back. Now, I do have better evidence, though. So we conducted a meta-analysis, a study of other studies, published it in November. It took us about a year to do. And so that's part of the reason why I'm throwing up this slide, just because so much work went into it. You can ignore everything on this slide except for the little black diamond. That little black diamond took me a year to draw, which is kind of depressing, isn't it? Anyway, we found that people who got paid to exercised 15% more than people who didn't. So that was our conclusion. And that number is probably a lot higher if you incorporate certain incentive design features, like larger incentives or meaningful incentives, things like that. Now, this conclusion has to do with, or is based on studies that were 6 months in duration or less, because most of the studies are really short studies. And similar conclusions have been drawn from other similar studies that studied incentives for weight loss, smoking cessation, diet, stuff like that. And I'll read it out because the font's a little small there. So incentives are most effective during an acute phase of delivery, with diminishing effects over longer periods, particularly if incentives are discontinued or removed. So why would we spend the money on somebody to motivate them to exercise if they're just going to stop after we take it away, right? Because the benefits of exercise really are the benefits of regular long-term exercise. So it wouldn't make much sense. And this is what often happens. This is an example drawn from the weight loss literature. So a bunch of people were paid to lose weight, and they did. They lost over 20 pounds on average. But within 2 years, they got back almost to baseline. So this is that yo-yo effect. Maria Recupero, who's going to be speaking to you next week, will probably touch on why this is not good for your health, losing weight, gaining it back, and doing that over again. So we want to avoid this, and this is one of the big knocks in the health incentive world. A lot of people, even experts, will say, do rewards motivate people? Professor Kahn says, yes, they motivate people to get rewards. Which isn't really what we want to do, right? So I would not fall into this camp. I disagree. I agree more with Stephen and Chris, who host that design show on CBC. Has anybody seen it? A couple of guys, they host this design show. They often say good design can change your life. Totally agree in a lot of ways, and especially when it comes to financial health incentives. That review that we did, that meta-analysis, it told us, yeah, incentives work. But even more important, it told us about when they work. So that's what I want to share with you a little bit now. Okay, so if incentives target, I mentioned I've got a 2-year-old, right? Hence the Elmo. You know, I don't just play with Elmo on my own home. So if incentives target the right monsters, AKA people, and what we mean by that is sedentary adults, then they're much more likely to work in the short term, but they're also much more likely to drive sustained behavior change, which is really interesting, I think. We don't want to be incentivizing the bunny oneies of the world who are very active, playing sports, doing their regular walking. Maybe this room is 95% bunny oneies, doing their regular walking. You don't need possibly a financial health incentives. In fact, if we started to put financial health incentives on people like you who are regular exercisers, we might actually do more harm than good by shifting your focus to an extrinsic motivation when in fact you were doing just fine with the intrinsic motivation, like the health and the enjoyment and that sort of thing. So we have to be careful with who we incentivize. The incentives also need to be meaningful. We need to pay enough or not at all. We can't give people peanuts. Would 10 cents motivate you to do anything? Would $1 motivate you to go for your walk? What about $2 at Tim Hortons or Starbucks? Would that pay for your coffee? Would that motivate you? Maybe. So if it's large enough, if it's meaningful enough, maybe it will stimulate some change and give you that extra boost that you need. And then the last thing is these programs need to be objectively assessed. So in the studies that we reviewed, we found that when the behavior was being objectively assessed, so tracked by a third party, so let's say swiping in at the YMCA or at your local gym, then that worked really well, like 80% of the time. So certain things need to be in place to initiate behavior change and drive the sustained behavior change we're after. So this is just a quick example. These researchers paid a bunch of college students some money to go to the gym. You see that brown line there at the top? That was the incentive group. So they did really well during the intervention period, which is between the dotted lines there. But what's most interesting about this study is that that incentive group was doing more exercise for 3 months after the intervention than they were doing at baseline. You see all the squiggly lines on the left-hand side of the screen there? That was baseline. Contrary to what Professor Kahn was saying, and contrary to that weight loss example, there are actually good examples of how we can drive sustained behavior change. And without getting into the nitty-gritty of it all, I just want to say that I think it's possible, and we shouldn't turn a blind eye to something that shows at least a little bit of promise. Now, this is my second last slide. I realize this is a kind of a controversial topic. I'm kind of happy I landed on it with my PhD work. Sometimes I get some funny looks. My grandmother thinks I'm crazy. So does my mom, for that matter. So because it's so controversial, Dr. O, our medical director, and Dr. Faulkner and Goodman, my supervisors, they all suggested that I start talking to some patients before we do this. So I did that. We conducted a few focus groups, talked to about 15 patients. We had 60 cardiac rehab graduates fill out questionnaires about this stuff. And it turns out that about 50% of people disagree with the approach right off the get-go. And that's quite important, actually. As is public opinion. So we published our review in November. The National Post wrote up an article about the review the next day, second page of the Post. I was so excited. Wow, my graduate research is getting some press. This is all worth it. And this is what ends up being posted. This is the title, Lure of Snacks to Motivate Regular Exercise in Cardiac Patients, with a big donut, with a big bite out of it, plastered in the front page section of the Post. So, unfortunate, the silver lining with this, quote unquote negative press was that we actually ended up taking Tim Hortons gift cards off the table with the pilot program we ended up doing. In the focus groups, people told us, yeah, Tim Hortons gift cards, I'll do anything for a Tim Hortons gift card. But it turns out people didn't think it was such a good idea, including this reporter. So we took that off the table. And so back to the focus groups and stuff. So 50% of people didn't agree with it. And so you might find yourself in the same position. But they thought, okay, well, if the incentive program isn't government funded, because I don't want my government paying for this sort of thing, if the incentives are coming from a company I trust, if they're health promoting incentives, like health promoting vouchers, if they're for behaviors that I can control and not for outcomes that are either unrealistic or in some cases hard to achieve or uncontrollable, like you can do all the exercise in the world, but sometimes you might not lose an inch, or it might not reflect on the scale. So if the incentives target the behaviors that you have a lot of control over, and finally, if you have the option to donate your incentive, we've got a shoe budget at Toronto Rehab. So the 30 or so people who participated in the pilot program we just finished had the option of donating their vouchers to our shoe budget. And as a result, we've been able to buy 5 or 6 brand new walking shoes for people in the program who couldn't otherwise. So that was also a really good option for people who just disagreed with the approach on moral grounds, or for people who were just making so much money it didn't make a hill of beans of a difference. So incorporating these sort of interesting incentive features might actually help to foster that positive environment that I was talking about at the outset. So I'll end with a quote from one of my favorite people, Don Cherry, the greatest Canadian, wasn't he? The smartest Canadian? Something. No, something like that. I'm getting some groans. Anyway, he said, or maybe it was Vince Lombardi, either way, he repeated this. And then cardiac rehab in quotes are my words. Cardiac rehab is 80% mental, the rest is in your head. I really love this quote. I really do, because it reminds me, it motivates me because it reminds me that we're actually all capable of a lot, probably a lot more than we think we are. And a lot of it has to do with getting your mind right when you're trying to do the things you want to do. And so this incentive stuff might be good for some people. It might not be good for others. It may be good for some behaviors. But what I do know for sure, based on the evidence and my experiences so far, it may be the nudge some people need to engage in those healthy behaviors that we want them so badly to do, not only from a system, healthcare savings perspective, but for their own good too. The challenge is, can we design and deliver these incentives in a way that is scalable, so lots of people have access to them, and in a way that drives that long-term sustained behavior change that we covet so much. Anyway, that's the end of my talk. I hope you found it interesting. I'd like to thank my family for letting me leave the house today during dinner time, and Rob for inviting me. And be easy on me with the questions, and I look forward to chatting with you after the talk. Yeah.
And on that note, Marc.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Very interesting session.
Thank you.